friends, and welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be doing my April monthly wrap-up. I honestly cannot believe that it's already May, but we're here. I have a lot of books to review since I had a lot of time to read on my trip to Korea, especially during those long flights, and I'm really excited to share with you all of the books that I read for this month. I'm just gonna quickly get right into it and talk about the monthly statistics. So for the month of April, I read a total of 9 books, meaning I finished it from start to finish. I have 2 books that I have caught up, and it's an ongoing series. So I'm not going to add it to the overall count of the month, and I'm not going to be talking about them, but I did read a couple of chapters here and there from a book that's currently being published. I have 1 book that I did not finish this month, and I have 1 book that I'm going to return to or roll over. That puts the overall count of the books that I either completed fully or have DNF'd it to be at 10, and that averaged out to be around 3,907 pages read, with the average rating being 4.12 stars, which is a pretty good month for having 9 books and 1 DNF. That's really good in my opinion. Of course, it wouldn't be my usual monthly statistics without showing you guys the charts that I have accumulated over the month. So on the screen, you should be able to see my monthly breakdown of day by day. I actually thought that this month was broken down to be a very good, even distribution of pages read per day, except for the days that I was on the flight. This month, because I read so many different books, you can probably see a variety of the colors in this chart. So for the month of April, my favorite piece of data has to be the numbers of pages read per month versus the number of books read per month. And I'm sure on the screen, I probably have both of the graphs zoomed in for you guys to see. And essentially, you can see that even though I read 2 more books in January than I did in April, I read almost 1,500 pages more in April, and I thought that was a really cool piece of data that I collected, that sometimes the numbers of books read don't actually equate to the numbers of pages read. Though I will say, after a long debate of trying to figure out what I'm going to do about the mangas that I do read on the phone, since I do purchase chapters here and there from like Tapas, Tappytoons, and all of that, how am I going to actually record the number of pages read since they don't really have a page counter? I just decided that I would count how many chapters I've unlocked and read, and I'm going to multiply it by 3.5 pages. So 1 chapter, I'm just gonna say it's approximately around 3.5 pages of reading text. I think that's a pretty fair equivalence in my opinion. So that's what I've been doing for my manga and manhwa reads, just to let you guys know for future references if you guys ever see the manga and manhwas and wonder like how I'm getting the number of pages for those. I'm just basically multiplying the number of chapters by 3.5. Okay, now let's dive in onto all the books that I read and completed for the month of April, with the first 2 being the light novels of the 7th Loop Villainess. And you guys probably have heard me talk about the 7th Loop Villainess already in my previous video, the March monthly wrap-up, so I'm just gonna leave a link somewhere up at the top for you guys to watch. Again, solid 5-star reads. I love the couple, so anything that is currently happening in the series, I am just obsessed with. I did, however, finish the 5th light novel already in the past 2 days, and that's gonna be going in my May monthly wrap-up. But I do feel like I just realized as I read the 5th novel is that the pacing is really fast for this book. I think between the time that she gets like engaged to Arnold and the time that she needs to marry him is within like 3 months. So I'm on volume number 4 or number 5, and it's only been in a span of 2 months, but they've already kind of fallen in love with each other. That timeline, like now that I think about it, that timeline is a little bit off for me. It's really rushed and really fast. But like I said, this series is supposed to be like YA, super fun, super action-packed. I don't think too much about it. It's definitely kind of like, if you're just looking for something cute to read, I would highly recommend this. I am foreseeing that I'm gonna slowly bump the series down to 4, depending on how the next couple of light novel releases become. But I still really love the characters. I love the embarrassment, the secondhand embarrassment Riche has on some of the stuff and some of the actions that Arnold does to her. Super cute. I'm gonna quickly go over the next 3 books as well because I've actually talked about it extensively in my previous vlog, my 24-hour reading vlog. It was part of the 24-hour reading challenge, so I have already talked about the books there and I don't want to really repeat myself. So I'm gonna do a rapid fire, quick star rating and a little bit about the books. So the first book is The Ruthless Knight. I gave it 4 stars. I thought it was a pretty solid read. I honestly didn't expect to enjoy the book that much, just simply because I don't really like high school romance. It is a high school romance slash sports romance, and it's not very sportsy. He is a quarterback, and it has that like typical high school vibe with the cool girls and the cool guys versus like the nerds, etc., etc. I don't really like that trope. That's not for me. Maybe because I'm just a little bit too old for it. But I really like the hard themes and the hard conversations they had in the book. My only complaint about it is that I felt like they should have just picked one and then really focused and dived into that problem. But again, still a really solid read. I felt like the characters had a lot of flaws, but they were still lovable in their own way. It was a surprising 4-star read, but I don't think I would pick up a book similar to that again. The next book is a 5-star read, and it is Father, I Don't Want to Get Married. It is so cute. I highly recommend that one, especially if you're starting out to read manga and manhwas. I feel like the quality of the manga and manhwas these days are out of this world. The artwork is beautiful. Like, I was in love with every single character in that manga. It's honestly too cute for me to even describe. I felt like the first, I want to say 75% of the book was mainly on the relationship between her dad and her rebuilding that trust and love with her dad and him vice versa. And along with kind of like the romance aspect of her and the crown prince. So for the last book that I read during my 24-hour reading vlog was The Lightning Thief, and it is part of the Percy Jackson series. I got into this book because my husband wanted to start reading it with me so he can get back into reading. And you know what? I'm proud of him because he actually read this. I did not have any expectation for him to actually read this, especially since I bought it, but he did finish it on our trip, which was a surprise. I'll tell you that much. He did only finish it on the plane ride back to America, but that's not the point of this video. I gave it 4.5 stars. I really liked this, even though it was a middle grade book. I was pleasantly surprised about how in-depth the characters were and all of the little exciting adventures that they went through. Personally, for me, I like my books to have romance in them, so the fact that this didn't have any romance, I did not expect to enjoy it. I was just like, okay, I'll read it, so he'll read it, but the pacing was fun. I'm pleasantly surprised. We did buy book 2 and 3, so we're going to be continuing reading that series. All right, now let's talk about the rest of the books that I finished for the month of April. So after reading The Lightning Thief, I read A Touch of Darkness, and I gave it 4 stars. After reading The Lightning Thief, I was in such a Greek god-like vibe. I really wanted to read more, and I wanted something spicy with romance, so A Touch of Darkness was the perfect book for me. I really like the interaction between Hades and Persephone. They are such a wonderful and beautiful couple. The tension in it was immaculate. Like, the first 50% of it was so much tension filled, and then I felt like the last 50% of it, they could have done without too much of the smut. I don't know. People say that it's a very smutty book, and I agree. It's extremely smutty, but the smut had a reason. Like, the first half of the book, they were doing it for the tension, but there were some parts in the last half of the book where I was just like, y'all should be talking it out, not boning it out. But you know what? You do you. So the biggest reason for me not giving this 5 stars, even though I thought it was a really, really good read at the time, was the fact that Hades did not grovel. I wish he did. Like, that meant, okay, he's not shady or anything, okay? But I wish he groveled for Persephone, because what ended up happening was that the first half of the book is this tension filled, the two of them kind of like getting to know each other and realizing that their fate is intertwined. My brain just like mashed those two words together and gave me twait. Their fates are intertwined. And then we have all that tension filled. And then the next, like, I want to say 20 to 25% of the book is the two of them kind of like learning about themselves and being in a relationship. And the last 25 to 30% of the book is like the climax, and shit hits the fan, right? And some stuff happens that basically makes Persephone really upset about Hades, because I do think what Hades did is kind of wrong. He should have at least told her that, but he didn't. So the two of them kind of left each other. And I really wish that it moved on to the next series of the book. I know that there's at least 2 or 3 more books after this, after A Touch of Darkness. And I really wished that they waited until the next book to get back together, and that he grovels in the next book. Like, it could have been a whole book itself, just him fixing the bullshit that he did, or at least the first 20% of the book. okay? And that's the reason why I gave it 4 stars. If that had happened, it would have been a solid 5 stars. I would have picked up the next book immediately. But because she kind of wrapped it up, they got together, they got back together, they kind of wrapped that back up. Because of that, I just had to bump it down because my expectation, I was like, oh my god. I remember reading it and I was like, oh my god, am I gonna have to read the next book to watch him grovel for her and watch him get her back? And like literally they get back together on the last page and it was very anticlimactic and I was like, all right, I mean, I guess it's fine, but I'm gonna pick up another book because I felt like this was wrapped up so cleanly already. It doesn't need a second book. You know what I'm saying? So the next book I read is a manhwa called Positively Yours, and I gave it 3.5 stars. It was just an alright manhwa. I have not a lot of things to say about it. It has a pregnancy trope, and it's very clear up front that it has a pregnancy trope, but it's handled in a very positive manner. I like that the characters were all very positive. They didn't have any, I mean, they have minor faults to them based on kind of like what they grew up with and the situations they were put in. But it was mainly that the female lead had faults. I felt like the male leads didn't have too many like faults about him. They made him to be a perfect gentleman, which isn't necessarily bad, but it just lacked a lot of depth for me. It just felt like a very straightforward manhwa. So I gave it 3.5 stars. It was enjoyable to read at the time, but it wasn't necessarily anything that I would say is like mind-blowing. So after Father, I Don't Want to Get Married, I was in a book hangover and I was desperately searching for my next high. So my husband recommended The Villainess Turns the Hourglass and I gave it a 4-star read. It was such a different novel slash manga that I've read in a long time because this is a true villainess, all right? So a lot of the times when you read villainous tropes in manga and manhwa, generally they're either framed to be a villainess or there's somebody in a villainous body and they're actually trying to not go down the villainous route anymore. So a perfect example of this is The Seventh Loop Villainess. It has that in the title, but she is not a villainess. She was just framed to be a villainess. But again, this novel, Arya, the main female lead, is 100% a villainess, and I love that for her. She is really out there to get revenge on all the people who've made her suffer in her previous life, but she does it in such a way that you don't hate her for being a villainess because a lot of the time her actions wouldn't impact the others, those who've done her wrong in her previous life, if they weren't already morally bad. So I gave it a 4-star read. It was a pretty good read. I would say the beginning is a little bit slow and it takes you a bit of time to really like the characters and her meticulous planning almost. Or maybe like my husband said, maybe you just don't like children because she does start out to be like, I want to say like a 13-year-old. And then because the book has really good pacing, I would say by the end of the novel, she reached her 18th birthday, I believe. So it was a pretty refreshing read because I felt like there was actual pacing and then character development and realistic reason why two characters would fall in love with each other. But I would say the romance aspect of it is kind of like a backseat, but I just love their interaction because he's really like, he knows how villainy she is and he does not care. He's like, you know what, I'll help you. And that is probably one of my favorite parts about the book. My last completed book for the month of April was Happy Place by Emily Henry. I gave it a solid 4.5 stars, and this book was actually recommended to me by another YouTuber named Love Lauren. I'll have her information in the cards and description, and she said this was her favorite Emily Henry book so far, so I had to pick it up. It was already in queue for my Libby app, so I was like, okay, let me quickly just jump in there and just grab the book in the Libby app and read it, since it actually arrived while I was in Korea, and it did not disappoint. Even though I have to say I was really reluctant to read it. The only reason I read it was because Lauren said it was her favorite book of all the Emily Henry series so far. So I was like, I feel like her and my tastes are kind of similar, so I'll pick it up, and did not disappoint. It's Second Chances, and if you know anything about Second Chances, for me, the first and only second chance I read was King of Greed, and it was terrible. I hated it. I hated it so much. I was ranting to my husband the whole time for that second chance book, so I was really reluctant to read it. But I'm glad I did because it wasn't just second chances. It talked about friendship and the friendship dynamic as you grow older, and it kind of touched like a place in my heart while reading this, and it was just honestly a really good read. I felt like the tension between the two was also beautiful. I loved every part of it. There was a lot of miscommunication, but I love that she was like, I'm gonna get back at him for doing all this shit. Like, why are you here? I did think he was a little clown for just showing up and not giving her any, well, I guess because he couldn't. All right, you know what? You're right, because he couldn't. But it was just like, I would lose my absolute mind fine. Like no one could have calmed me down, you know, like no one could have calmed me down. But I suppose again, I'm not that character. She is a little bit more shy. She is the person who always likes to play the mediator. And I believe it stems from like her relationship with her parents. I really like that dynamic. Like the characters are so in depth and it was just perfectly beautiful. I really like it. The only miscommunication part that I really didn't like was the fact that they kept asking each other if they're happy and they're both lying about it. And it was just, I was just like the whole time I was reading, I was like, just tell each other how you actually feel. But again, still a really good read. I'm so glad I picked it up. So thank you, Lauren. And now on to the final book of the month, and it is the DNF book of the month, and it is Highest Bidder Bought. I mean, like, just, okay, hear me out. I know, everyone's gonna be like, what did you expect going into this? But I was honestly just looking for spice. I don't know, I was just feeling spicy. I like the tropes. I thought it would be interesting, but the characters, oh god, the characters, I couldn't get past 100 pages. And honestly, that's too much. Like, you can't be walking around with a hard boner all the time, man. Like, that's not okay. You need to know a place and a time to have it, all right? Thank you. But you know what? It's fine. It's fine. It's fine. And there you have it. That is all the books I read for the month of April. I thought it was a pretty solid month. I read a lot of good books this month, and I was kind of surprised. There were a lot of books that I went in not really knowing how I would feel about the books, and they all turned out to be pretty solid reads. So I'm really happy about that. So I'm going to do something a little bit different in this video, and I'm actually going to talk about my May TBRs as well, because specifically for this month, I have a lot of Libby loans coming in. So I have a lot of books to read, and I'm expecting a huge amount of savings for the month of May, because I can already, like, on top of my head, I know I have at least 6 or 7 books that are out on loan to me right now, and I'm gonna quickly rapid fire and go through them. So before I go through my Libby loans, let's talk about the books I purchased for the month of May. If you guys know anything about me, I'm an ebook girly through and through, but I will dabble in buying books here every now and then if I really enjoyed the book previously and I want to support the author, or it's a pre-order. And as far as I know, I think pre-orders are the best way to support author in advance of the book actually being published. So here's my stack of books that I purchased for the month of May. And again, I shop at my local bookstore. I highly recommend you guys also picking up books from your local bookstore, because it's probably the best way to support the community. So let's quickly go through these 4 books. These 2 books were pre-order because I already know that I really love The Seventh Loop Villainess. I wanted to support my local bookstore, plus the fact that I wanted to support the author for The Seventh Loop Villainess. I actually already finished this, and it is like the 2nd day of May, and I really enjoyed it. I kind of gave a little bit blurb about it. I think I'm going to be bumping this book down to 4 stars now that I kind of know the pacing of the book. And the pacing's a little bit ridiculous, just a little bit, but I'm willing to look past it because they are so cute together. And the next book that I picked up was another pre-order, and it is A Promised Peridot. And this is the 2nd book in the Sacred Stones trilogy. And the 1st book was A Dawn of Onyx. So I picked this up, and this is actually my first ever pre-order, and I would even say this is the first book I bought since I got into reading again in 2024. And this was a pre-order because I really enjoyed the 1st book, A Dawn of Onyx, and I felt like the world building was really solid in A Dawn of Onyx. I really liked the tension between Arwen, the female lead, and the male lead. So I thought the end was a little dramatic, but I was like, you know what? I really enjoyed it. So I'm gonna pre-order the book to support the author and read it. And if I really don't like it, I will just wait for the 3rd book to come out and just get it on Libby. Personally, for me, I am a completionist, so you already know I'm gonna try to finish the whole series. So those 2 books were pre-orders, and I picked it up at my local bookstore. And while I was there, I also picked up the next 2 books of the Percy Jackson series, because my husband prefers to read on actual paperback versus a Kindle. So I picked these up for him. Something that, I don't know if I'm annoyed per se, but something that I realized is that these 2 are actually different editions than the current edition I have of the 1st book. So this is the 1st book, and these are the 2nd and 3rd book. They're not the same edition, but I don't know if I care enough to make sure that they all look the same. So he's gonna have to deal with it. I don't think he particularly cares. I don't think I particularly care. I'm really not in the headspace to be like, I'm gonna buy a book just so it matches, just because what am I gonna do with this one, you know? So that is all the 4 books that I recently received, and I might pick up for May as long as I finish all my Libby loans. Okay, so I have my Kindle with me right now, and I'm gonna quickly go through the 5 books that I have on loan from the Libby app right now. The first one being Mr. Wrong Number, then I have The Kiss Quotient, and the next one I have is Divine Rivals. The last 2 books were actually recommendations from another YouTuber named Chronically D, Chris. Chris, if you're watching this, thank you for the recommendations. I'm so excited. I somehow managed to skip the line because I believe somebody passed on their turn and said, bring this back to me in X number of days. So I got to skip the line for these next 2 books, and I was so happy. The first book being Front Desk, and the next book is Butcher and Blackbird. This is supposed to be like serial killer-esque vibes, beat like romance, and that seemed like a really interesting trope, so I'm excited to read it. As for Mr. Wrong Number, Kiss Quotient, and Divine Rival, I have no idea. I just know that they're popular and I'm just reading it for a good time. I know that there's a little bit of romance in Divine Rivals. I think there's romance in Divine Rivals. I'm not sure. I know it's a fantasy book. As you can see, I really don't know what I'm getting into for any of the books. I generally just hear about them. If I think I'll like them at the time, I will put it in the Libby queue and just wait for it to trickle in. If the synopsis with all the videos that I see is good enough, I'll go ahead and purchase it. But right now, I think I have a pretty full plate, so I won't be purchasing any books for the time being and probably live off of my Libby queues. I think I should have a good amount of books to actually trickle in. I think the trickle is starting. It's like a whole wave. You know what I'm trying to say? Like, you finish the first set and then the next set will come in and then the third set. So right now, I think I'm solid. I don't expect to be buying books as often as I was in the previous month. So I'm pretty excited about that. And with that, that is it for the video. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you guys in the next video. Bye!